Look, Muawiyah, look.
Where?
Look at the goat on the tree.
A goat?
Yes, there.
A dove. That's a dove.
Look carefully, man. See its horns.
What horns?
The goat's horns.
These are tree branches. It's clear, man. Look carefully. This is a branch, and that's another. A goat? Rub your eyes. Night shifts have really taken their toll on you. Rub your eyes. A goat. It is a dove. What do you see?
It's a goat, man. There's its tail.
A goat? Its tail? What tail, Eamon? Just an eyelash in your eye making you see a tail. Come on, remove it.
There, did you hear?
Hear what?
It said, Ma!
It's a man calling his daughter, Rima, Rima. See? It flew. It's a dove.
A goat, even if it flew.
Peace be upon you. Darwin's table collapsed when the four myths that supported it collapsed, as we explained last episode. So, Darwin's followers rushed to make modifications to the theory. Were they able, with these modifications, to correct its errors, close its gaps, and restore it, in line with other modern scientific discoveries as claimed? Or did the notion that living organisms don't need a creator so appeal to them, that they wanted to preserve it at all cost? Let us see. The main modification that Darwin's followers made to the elements of his theory was the attempt to reconcile natural selection with the principles of genetic inheritance, meaning they acknowledged that use and disuse can't give an organism new traits beyond those already present in the genetic material of its ancestors. For example, the giraffe's neck did not elongate across generations as a result of stretching it to eat from the treetops. They also acknowledged that acquired traits can't be passed on to offspring, in contradiction with Darwin's and Lamarck's views. So, what was the driver for the alleged changes in organisms which are the raw material for natural selection? Their answer? Several factors. Random mutations that might occur in the genome due to heat, chemicals, cosmic rays, etc. These mutations caused the slow, gradual, and cumulative changes that Darwin hypothesized. Then, nature eliminated the organisms which had harmful mutations and kept those with beneficial mutations in a transitional phase to a new organism. They called this modified model Neo-Darwinism, or modern synthesis. Dobzhansky, Fisher, Mayer, Huxley, and others co-formulated this model. According to Neo-Darwinism, mutations are random, while natural selection is directed towards gradual evolution, and reproduction ensures the continuation of the newly evolved species. Let's see whether, with this, they were able to restore the collapsed pillars of Darwin's theory and reconcile it with recent discoveries. What are the pillars of Darwin's theory? First, a simple organism that somehow emerged from inanimate matter. Those who came after Darwin realized that there was no such thing as a simple organism. Electron microscopes showed that the living cell, the smallest building unit, which Darwin perceived as a smudge, was in fact more complex than the most complex man-made factory 3D visuals were made to capture its magnificence. Did the intricacy and magnificence in the cell's design lead them to concede that it must have a creator who created it with knowledge and will, and to correct Darwin's mistake in this regard? No. All their theories boil down to Darwin's view that life somehow emerged from inanimate matter in a clear defection from rationality, and the experimental evidence in the studies of Louis Pasteur and Francesco Redi 4 centuries ago, who proved that life doesn't spontaneously emerge from inanimate matter. They came back to Darwin's myth of spontaneous generation. However, unlike Darwin's view that the first organism developed spontaneously in a lake, their view was it was an ocean, with music and cinematography to reinforce the majesty of this fiasco. They went back to Darwin's myth, but by doing so, they were more ignorant than he was because, unlike Darwin, they saw the amazing complexity in the cell. Really, 150 years since Darwin's myth, and still his followers cannot come up with another myth to explain the origin of life. Up until the 21st century. But they did indeed. Let's see an example of the latest findings of modern mythology.
It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they seeded onto, perhaps this planet.
So, he's saying that aliens seeded early life on Earth. Remember that we're not in Disneyland or watching Space Tunes, but discussing science, as they call it. Aliens? How did they emerge? Who planted their seed? Dawkins thinks that they may have evolved in a Darwinian way, in an infinite regress. This is in addition to other jokes we'll discuss in an upcoming episode on the origin of life, Allah willing. So they seem to be as lost as Darwin from the very start. Did they really reconstruct this collapsed pillar of the myth? Or was their argument, it is a goat, even if it flies? The second pillar of the Darwin's theory is that nature grants an organism new traits by use and disuse, as with the giraffe example. This myth was invalidated, so they replaced it with a more ridiculous myth that random mutations, i.e., an accumulation of errors, is behind the creation of organisms, with all their beauty, symmetry, diversity, and intricate design. I.e., that DNA damage in an organism, e.g., from radiation or chemicals produced, after many attempts, a new higher-level organism with completely integrated organs and so on, until we got to where we are, with more than 8 million intricately designed species existing in harmonious biodiversity on Earth. So, damage-innovated organisms is the modification to Darwin's theory. They'll say, no, we are talking about beneficial random mutations that add new code. We ask, what are beneficial random mutations? Give one example of a mutation that added a new gene since the time Mendel discovered genes in 1860, a century and a half ago. This is a very embarrassing question for the myth disciples, as they struggle to find a single example of what they claim to be the biggest driver for the production of all organisms. Let's watch Richard Dawkins's predicament as he fumbles to answer this question.
Can you give an example of a genetic mutation or an evolutionary process which can be seen to increase the information in the genome?
Can you just stop when I think?
I'm recording.
Okay. Can you just stop when I think?
Okay, can you just stop while I think? Stop recording. Give me time to come up with another joke like the joke of aliens seeding life on Earth. Watch how, after much thought, his reply was to completely change the subject. To avoid falling again into such a predicament, the myth disciples resorted to the biggest fabrication in the history of life sciences, calling adaptations microevolution. In other words, they claimed that the highly accurate and amazingly fine-tuned adaptations are a result of random mutations. As Dawkins says in his book, The Greatest Sham, oops, the greatest show on Earth, the evidence for evolution. He, the evolutionary biologist, lies to his readers by presenting examples of exquisite adaptation involving the activation of pre-existing genes as, what do you think, as random mutations, a distasteful, blatant lie. Shall I prove it to you? Please check out next week's video, link in the end screen, where we discuss Lenski's experiment on citrate-utilizing bacteria. It's an important episode that exposes the downright fraud and deceit in dealing with this experiment, an experiment described by one of the myth disciples, who starts his videos in the name of Allah as one of the strongest proofs presented by atheist evolutionists for the chance formation of complex structures. What a pity. Watch how we burst the bubble of this experiment so that you know the truth behind random mutations, which the myth disciples present as a substitute for the all-knowing wise creator, and you can judge whether they are filling gaps or having hallucinations that rival Darwin's when he claimed that nature grants living organisms new traits by use and disuse. The third pillar of Darwin's theory is the inheritance of traits acquired by use and disuse. For example, a bear whose mouth widened 1 centimeter to catch flies while relaxing in the sea passed down that centimeter to his offspring and so on, until the mouth widened more and more to transform the bear into a whale. And all of this supposedly occurred through gemmules, secreted by somatic cells, which changed the reproductive cells, according to Darwin's so-called pangenesis theory. As mentioned, these are obsolete myths, yet Darwin's followers found it hard to accept that their teacher could have been wrong, so they revived this myth. Even now, in the 21st century, we still see publications in peer-reviewed scientific journals trying to defend this myth and present Darwin as a visionary. They revived this myth as they revived the spontaneous generation myth before. Down with science, down with observation. Let goats fly for your sake, Darwin. The fourth pillar of Darwin's theory is that slight, gradual, and cumulative changes transform one organism into another by means of natural selection, which operates very much like the example of the blind people's plane presented last episode. After Darwin, much evidence of irreducible complexity in organisms emerged, even at the structural level of the simplest organisms, such as the bacterial flagellum that mobilizes some bacteria, whose structure requires tens of proteins co-formulated by approximately 40 genes, in such a precise arrangement that a change might produce a non-functioning flagellum. All this complexity is in a tiny part of the tiny bacterial cells, millions of which are smaller than a single pinhead. This is in a whip-like bacterial flagellum, as if to whip their obstinate minds into reason, not to mention the more intricate complex systems in the eye and ear, or those required for a complete, integrated, and harmonious body, where a slight change might lead to disharmony or destruction. With the advance in science, the joke of natural selection has become more laughable, so the scientific position of naturalists should have been to feel ashamed of Darwin's words and sweep them under the carpet, much the same way that a wise boy would make excuses for his drunk father's mindless stumbling. But a goat, even if it flew. The Darwinian myth must continue. So they gave this myth a scientific name, co-option theory. That is, as in the example of the blind people's plane, the same glass sheet that a blind man used as a shield against his blind enemies was used by blind natural selection for a different option. Then, over time, it transformed into pressure-resistant glass for a mighty Boeing plane. Voila! Similarly, everything in existence was formed, according to the myth disciples, unintentionally. They say,
A bird's wing looks as though it has a purpose. A human eye looks as though it has a purpose, but it has come about through the process of non-random natural selection. There is no purpose in the human sense. There's a kind of pseudo-purpose.
Did they heed the discoveries of the eye structure with its rods, cones, receptors, neurotransmitters, the analysis in the brain centers, and the storage of the image? No, they just said, this all is without intention. Allah says what is translated as, say, observe what is in the heavens and earth, but of no avail will be signs or warners to a people who do not believe. According to them, the first cell emerged unintentionally, and its slight modifications were also unintentional. Then natural selection accumulated the slight gradual changes transforming one species to another, also unintentionally. No intention or will involved, just a sum of coincidences. All these finely tuned and magnificent organisms were created without intention and came about by mistake. Darwin paved the way for scientific delirium and corrupted minds with his claim of purposelessness, his claim that the precision in living organisms does not require a creator, and that innovation doesn't require an innovator. However, he didn't, in his book, deny the existence of the creator or express skepticism about his existence. But many of his followers who adopted his principles said, the matter from which life emerged does not require a maker, and nature, which selected, doesn't require a creator. Even the universe doesn't require a creator. All this came unintentionally from nothing. These are the elements of Darwin's myth, and this is what his followers did. So did they fill the gaps in his theory? Or instead present more examples of denial and delusion? Was it a correction of mistakes, or staying the course of misguidance and ignorance to its very end? Is this science, or a regression to the Dark Ages? It is a myth temple where the worshippers erected an idol for natural election, and another idol for randomness, then attributed to these idols all creation, design, perfection, and precision, unparalleled absurdity. Not even the people of Jahiliyyah, pre-Islam ignorance, ascribed such attributes to Lat and Uzza, their idols. The term error correction may be applied to a theory whose fundamental concept is true, but with errors in the details. Filling gaps may be done for a structure that's still standing, but with some gaps, Darwin's theory has no legs to stand upon, and its defect, irrationality, is in its fundamental concept. The scientific stance should have been to totally reject it and bury it along with its dead author. However, Darwin's supporters wanted the myth of unintentionality to endure. Any self-respecting scientist follows the evidence wherever it might lead, but the myth disciples place the cart before the horse. They want, at all cost, to preserve Darwin's conclusion, that organisms came by mistake without intention, just like that, regardless of the mental tax of denial, absurdity, and discrediting and betraying the mind, science, and modern discoveries. Darwin's table couldn't bear the load of what he desperately piled on top of it. All living organisms. And those who came after him simply dug more holes in his table, as we saw. Therefore, Darwin and his followers resorted to their best mastered trick, turning invalidating evidence against their myth into supporting evidence, in the eyes of fools and simpletons. In other words, they took some load off the table and transformed it, with a magic wand, into new pillars to prop up the myth table. They came up with so-called lines of evidence for the theory. Follow us as we discuss these lines in our next episode and expose the myth's absurdity so you can realize the truth in Allah Almighty's words, which is translated as, "No, we hurl the truth against falsehood, and truth obliterates it. Behold, it perishes. May Allah's peace and mercy be upon you."